Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Talking Smack, where we talk superheroes, movies, animation, comics, and much, much more. I'm your host, Josh Scar, and joining me, as always, is everyone's favorite cat man. It's Alex. Alex, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I've been working on my facial expression, specifically my eyebrows. Do you see how they move better now? Oh, yes.
The eyebrows are they are the window to the soul. They say you can if you can master the Jim Carrey side to side, that's where you're at.
Look, pensive. Surprised.
And as you may have heard from the giggle, we are also joined by the wonderful Bekkie. Bekkie is back this week. How you doing, Bekkie?
I am good. It was really hard for me to not make a comment.
Oh no, she forgot to turn off her camera.
Oh, I did. Am I messed up?
A little bit, but it probably recorded you. But feel free to roll it again and turn off your camera so we don't lose you again.
I totally forgot. It was looking so smooth, and I missed you so much. Well, see, now it
smooth
won't let
like
me.
A baby's bottom.
Now it says I have to watch. Now you have to watch me. I can't turn my camera off.
It won't let you turn it. Wow, that's so weird.
It won't actually. How did we do it last time?
We'll figure it out. But before we do that, we as you heard from the intro music, we have a very special guest joining us this week. We are joined by author Douglas A. Burton. We're going to talk to him about his books as well as his storytelling mechanic with the Heroine's Labyrinth, which is very exciting and very cool. So we're going to get into that. But first, we're going to hear from Justin Henson over at the Movie Wire, and we'll be right back.
He's on the run from the law, falsely accused of murdering his... Wait. Oh, got my scripts mixed up here. Here we go. This makes more sense. The Movie Wire Podcast with host Justin Henson. Hear Justin's movie verdict wherever you listen to podcasts. Tune in to The Movie Wire today.
And we're back. As mentioned, we are here with Douglas A. Burton, author of... Oh, shoot. I lost my notes. Where did they go? Alex, this is... Make it sound more professional, please. No. Author of Faraway Bird and The Heroine's Labyrinth. Douglas, how are you doing?
I am doing wonderful. How about you guys?
I'm a little embarrassed now, but I'm doing okay otherwise.
I'm doing great. When we confirmed that we were able to get the interview with you, I apologize. I bought the ebook. The hardcover would not get here quick enough, but I did get the ebook.
Oh, yeah, no apology needed.
So, Douglas, when we have interviews, we have one very important question we always start off with, and that is, what you doing? What do you do when you're not writing books or any other paid work that you get? What do you do for fun?
For fun, I write, but I also have a day job to pay the bills and to put a roof over the head, and that is in real estate. And I live here in Austin, and real estate's been it's been keeping me busy, which is a good thing. I like to be busy. The busier I am, the happier I get for some reason. But I'm also a full-time dad. So I've got my two boys. My youngest is 9 years old. His name is Lucas. And my oldest is going to turn 12 next week. And his name is Jacob. And he plays a lot of baseball here in Central Texas. And this is like the baseball capital of the state. So it's pretty intense, and entire weekends are devoted to baseball tournaments at times. So you gotta really want it if you're gonna do some writing. You gotta fight for it on the schedule.
Oh yeah, what position does your son play?
He's mainly a pitcher. He's a left-handed pitcher.
That's great. Left-handed pitcher. He's got places to go.
He's excellent. It's been such a treat as a dad to watch him develop. He's got a great pitch that kind of tails off, and he gets a lot of good swingers to swing and miss. So he's mainly a pitcher. He also plays first base and outfield.
One of my favorite sports broadcasters from the Chicagoland area where we're from, he talked about when his son was born, how he's like, I'm going to raise him left-handed and he's going to be a pitcher because there's good money to be made as a left-handed pitcher. They're so rare. If you can be good at it, that's some good money for 10 to 20 years of your life.
Come on, Jacob. I'm pulling for you, buddy.
Let Dad retire as a writer. Let's go.
And yeah, I'm actually from the Chicago area originally. So
fantastic.
Very familiar with I went to Maine South High School and Park Ridge and all that. So Chicago is like my second home there.
So what is your favorite Chicago teams then?
The Chicago Cubs, North Side.
Okay. All right. Okay.
And they did win today. It's weird, when you live in Chicago, you either like the Cubs or the Sox, and there is no compromise on that. But when you leave the state, when Chicago becomes home, you find yourself less concerned about the divide, and it's like even the White Sox are okay because they're still from Chicago. They still remind you of home. So I'll watch even a White Sox game.
Well, I wouldn't recommend that right now. There are more important things you can do, or better things you can do with your time than watching the White Sox.
That's true. That is true.
I say this as a White Sox
haven't
fan.
been that great either.
Bekkie, do you exist still, or did you just appear on us?
She might have. Did you mute your microphone again and forget?
Sorry, my bad. Wow, I've been really contributing to this conversation and wondering why 3 men are not letting me talk.
Well, yeah, they are just not listening.
But wait, I had a really important question, and it was super intelligent and smart, and it was, does anybody know the name of the pitcher on the Cardinals?
Which one?
The tall one. I don't know. Yeah, today.
I think it was Miles Mikolas or something like that.
Was it Miles? I make him coffee before his games. And so I saw him and he left, and I looked at my coworker and I went, I do not know his name. I was like, I have made him coffee so many times, and I do not know his name. And I felt really bad because he's very nice.
Oh, well, did he have a mustache?
Miles Mikolas? Mikolas?
Yeah, I think that's who pitched.
I'm pretty sure it was him today.
He's
Okay,
6'4",
yeah, that's right.
230 pounds.
That's him.
He's got the stash. That's kind
Yes,
of
he does.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question, Bekkie. Is the
Yes.
reason why you don't know his name is because when you signed the coffee cup, you instead of writing Miles, you wrote like Gerald, and you just hold and say what the order is?
Hope for the best.
No.
He just thinks it's a hilarious bit.
No, Ollie, their like coordinator, he comes in and gets a chai. So I say his name, I know him, I say hello, I'm super polite. And then if any other sports person comes in, I go, hello, my love, or hello, my pet, or okay, darling. I don't know why. There's lots of finger guns happening. I've never been this person in my life, but suddenly on my very first day, I was like, yes, my darling, what would you love? And then when I bring people their shit, I'm like, here you are, love of my light, light of my stars, moon in my sky. It's really fucking weird. So I might have called for the soccer players moon of the sky. He doesn't come in anymore.
So while it's awesome to get to talk a little bit of sports and let Bekkie regale us with how she gets away with not knowing anyone's name, Douglas is here to talk about his profession and primarily storytelling, which female-led storytelling, really. And the Heroine's Labyrinth is kind of where I want to start this, because it's such an interesting concept. Because after we talked with Farah, the publicist who hooked us up together, I looked into all these things and just like, yeah, this seems like such a novel concept that maybe this is where, because we focus very heavily on movies, that stuff like, and Bekkie, you can feel free to chime in on this, stuff like The Hunger Games and probably more in our parlance, Captain Marvel, it's just missing something. Like it feels like instead of growing women as a character in some of these things, it's more about just like putting them through the ringer and just showing how strong women are without really developing any truly strong characteristics or growing the character overall. So where did that come from for you?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying, and there's so many examples, my generation growing up in the 80s of these great heroines. You have Ripley and Sarah Connor, and there's a whole bunch of great ones. And suddenly, like recently, they got a little loose on it, and I think you're right. I think the intention is there. The right intentions are there. They want good, positive portrayals of women. They don't want them cast as secondary characters that or just decorative, characters in the background. So there's an effort to try to right the ship and have positive portrayals of women in film and comics and TV series. So some are better than others. Like you said, Captain Marvel had some things that were okay and other things that may have been a swing or miss. But I grew up also on the hero's journey, and there's a certain universal quality to the hero's journey. There's also plenty of criticism for it, for being a little male-centric. And, not everybody resonates with the hero's journey. So, especially for memoirists, I've talked to many memoirists who have said that, I don't have a hero's journey. So it would be hard to organize certain stories using the hero's journey. And I know this firsthand because I have a historical figure, the Byzantine Empress Theodora from my debut novel, which was a historical fiction book. And the hero's journey, I bet the farm on it. I was going to organize the story based on the hero's journey, steps and progression. And about halfway through, not even halfway through, I realized this was going to fail. And that was a big, devastating blow to me because, I was under the assumption that the hero's journey should and could be adapted into anything. And so, I wanted to find alternative models, and specifically if there was anything in terms of organizing stories for female characters, if there was anything out there. And there are books out there that address this, and some of them are helpful, and some of them are very helpful, but really none of them helped me as a writer. The hero's journey was very useful to me as a writer. I can immediately adapt it. I can immediately see the value of certain structural elements and immediately apply them into a chapter. So I started my own studies on it. I started going back and watching all my favorites. I went back and read all the classics, Jane Eyre, Pride and Prejudice. I read Memoirs of a Geisha, Gone with the Wind. I mean, Their Eyes Were Watching God. And I'm trying to figure out what these, classic heroines have in common with, Ellen Ripley or Sarah Connor or Katniss Everdeen. And I did find some similarities, and I started there, and I began to look at this as something distinctive, a new approach to just approaching story and forgetting about the hero's journey for a second, and then seeing what I could find. And it took 4 years to put all this together. So, 4 years of dedicated practice on this to get it articulated. So it took a while.
So the hero's journey is the easiest way to go about it that anyone would know for the last 50 years is Luke Skywalker, the quintessential farm boy who wants for more, needs a mentor, something happens, propels his journey, must fight, and discovers his power towards the end, really comes into his own. But what I found very interesting is when you're reading the book and talking about you're trying to adapt that, is I was thinking of, not to get into a long conversation about it, but The Force Awakens is basically a recreation of A New Hope. But there was a lot of pushback against basically just swapping Luke for Rey, when what I feel like the authors were scared to have any failing happen therein. It was ensuring a pluckiness and adventure and always a drive forward, always achieving. But when you look at your book, when you go through the heroine's journey, and not to say that one thing I love reading, oddly enough, I love reading romance novels. I like YA books. There's Rachel Kane has the Glass Houses series about vampires in Austin, Texas that I love. There's 16 of those. I love them. A lot of my friends are really into the paranormal urban settings, Dead Witch Walking and stuff like that. Those all are, when reading your book, do come out as this labyrinth of I'm not saying to make a female character engaging, because female characters are engaging, but to not have a journey built upon the soldier's journey like Luke or brute force. There needs to be emotional, tangible challenges just beyond, I got to pick up a sword and do better. And that sparked, you talk about Beauty and the Beast and mentioning, James Cameron with Ripley. In each of James Cameron's stories, whether it's Sarah Connor, Ripley, or Helen Trasker in True Lies, she has her own agency, she has her confines, she has her emotional crux. And I think about the most powerful scenes in True Lies or Titanic are when Helen is being interrogated by, as you would call, one of the, the Chamber Guardians.
Yes.
Or what is happening with Rose when she is being corseted up by her mother. And her mother's literally binding her into the confines of societies that she's rebelling against. Those are the emotional cruxes of that movie. Not Arnold Schwarzenegger catching the bad guy. Helen Trasker is the journey that holds True Lies into itself. And yes, you have the bad boy, Jack Dawson, but Rose DeWitt Bukater dealing with her mother's trying to subjugate her, the Minotaur in disguise of crap, what is his
Cal
name?
Hotley.
Of Cal. Those are our journeys. You may put the male figure, the male face on that, but James Cameron understands a woman's path, I think, pretty well, and it fits so well within this tome that you've written here.
Well, so I tried to focus on the stories that resonated with a lot of people. The big stories, the ones that are popular. I made a heavy effort to include examples that I thought people would recognize. One of the problems I had when I read The Hero with a Thousand Faces was that Joseph Campbell would cite some mythology from far away, and I would have to A, take his word that he interpreted it properly, and B, that this is one interpretation of possibly multiple interpretations of the same myth. So it was actually very difficult to process that. So I tried to focus on hundreds of examples that I thought people could remember themselves and reference themselves. So the big distinction between the hero's journey and the heroine's labyrinth was the hero's journey by definition. Act 1, Campbell calls the departure, and then part 3 is the return. So it's clearly a departure and a return, and a departure from the native culture. So the hero goes out. There's a wilderness survival aspect on many, in some cases, but the idea is that the hero is being tested by external issues far from home, and that is a serious thing. That is traumatic. There is a growth arc there. It really tests your identity along that path. But in heroine stories, I just noticed that departure and return was not happening the same way. So what you really have is a character, a heroine who is staying in her native culture, and there is a primary conflict between the heroine and her native culture, and I think that's fundamentally and existentially different in terms of a conflict between a character and what they're up against. It's not monster combat. It's not wilderness survival. You are dealing with social situations, social pressures. Gender roles is a big one. Cultural expectations, morals, and rights and wrongs. So these kind of box in a lot of heroines in their stories, and so there's a socio-cultural right and wrong. Do this and you'll live happily ever after. Do that and you won't. You can't do this, but you can do this. Don't stigmatize yourself or the family. These are all very unique pressures, and so the socio-cultural confines that these heroines find themselves in, I've called the labyrinth. And there is a game-like quality to it. Whether you're trying to win at culture or win at the game, like in Hunger Games, it's a perfect example of how you can have this game theory style event where the heroine is like a woman on a game board and trying to navigate, to survive in this situation. So, but she's in her native culture, and I think that's a big distinction between the two models.
Bekkie, any questions?
No, I am very much loving listening to it. I guess one, which would be, has anyone heard of or does anyone remember Tamara Pierce, the author?
Tamara Pierce. Who is Tamara Pierce?
One of my absolute top favorite authors. I believe her books start way back in the 80s. Oh, am I all off again? I did cut off again. I don't know why it's doing that today. I believe she started writing in the 80s, but she writes only female-centric characters, and she's got about 15 books set in one place, and I just love her so much. But not a lot of people I ask remember her or know about her.
Okay. I can look into her.
She wrote the Song of the Linus series.
Yes, that's where it starts. Oh, I'm in it right now. I read it once a year, every year.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I can tell there's some excitement there.
I do really like her. I would like for her to know.
I wanted to make sure Bekkie was here because she's the most avid reader I know besides my wife.
Oh, wow. That's
I
incredible.
did read I read 30 books in June. I did get to 30.
Holy
They were
cow!
good.
I was proud of myself for 2 a month for a while.
Yeah,
That's incredible.
I'm one of those people. And her in particular, and all of the people who write, don't know if anyone remembers the Royal Diaries series, because that was kind of important as a girl growing up, for that I found and read these. And there was a group of girls that I read them with. They are historical fiction books that take historical figures and pretend as though they've been given a diary of some sort. So you have like Catherine the Great, you have Anastasia. It's all races, all cultures, all over the place. And so, yeah, sometimes the whole point is, hey, I'm getting married off. What's going on with my life? Yeah, they don't do anything. I mean, they're not, there's no fighting, there's no nonsense, there's no combat. This is what my job is, this is what I have to do, but here are the things I'm struggling with about myself. So, and all the authors are like, of course, it's half, at the end of the book, they give you the actual details of like what happened to, so like Catherine the Great, here's actually what her story is, but this is why we took her at age like 11 and made it as though she's just an 11-year-old girl trying to figure out what her identity is, what she's supposed to do, her role in the world. And there's like a ton of them. A ton of them.
Wow. Well, and so you just said it, the conflict is fundamentally different. And so what I'm trying to do in the Heroine's Labyrinth is separate it out and say, let's just look at what is it to have a struggle with your native culture. Forget the departure and return. Forget all that for a second. What does it mean? And it's not gender exclusive, by the way. You don't have this. This does not have to apply to all female characters. Female characters can go on the hero's journey, but in a lot of the stories that I've studied, a lot of the classics and the big stories with heroine-led stories, they tend not to. They just tend not to. And also, males can do a heroine's labyrinth structure. In fact, there's plenty of stories that I found that have Rambo, Fight Club, The Godfather. I mean, these are pretty good stories with male characters and their heroine's labyrinth structures. So I just wanted to get that out of the way, that I am not saying this is how you must write female characters. I'm just saying, if you're trying to organize a story, I looked at heroine-centric stories and found an alternative model that you might be able to use. And it's a fascinating model because it does separate out and focus on fundamental differences, like what does it mean to have a struggle with your native culture? I think that it's internally very difficult, to be stigmatized by your own society, to be labeled an outcast, a scarlet letter, to be turned against. That is a psychological struggle that is not like being wounded on the trail far from home. Both are traumatic, but they're different. And I think it's important to separate those out and to take a serious look at the struggle with the native culture, which is the labyrinth. So, and that's one. That's one of 18 archetypal distinctions that we're aiming for with the Heroine's Labyrinth. The second, and I would say this kind of goes hand in hand with the first archetype, is the villain of the story, the bad guy. I noticed that in the hero's journey, there's what I call the distant dragon archetype, which is usually a militant outsider from the native culture. This is someone who is inhuman, machine, reptile, alien. They're there to annihilate or subjugate the native culture. They're out in the open. They're not trying to hide themselves. They are right there. And it's they're come at me, bro, is kind of their thinking, and you gotta go face that villain in usually single combat in the hero's journey. The villain in heroine-centric stories is almost never that person. The villain is often a member of the native culture, and often a social apex character, meaning a character with prestige, social power, someone who is benevolent, on the outside has a benevolent appearance. However, this character hides a dark and oppressive and cruel side. And so there's a duplicity to the masked Minotaur archetype in heroine-centric stories. And I picked Minotaur because the Minotaur is half man, half beast in mythology, as an actual character in mythology from Minos. And it's a cursed creature. The Minotaur has the disguise is their humanity. but their real dominant self is their animal savage side. So like you mentioned Titanic, Alex, in one scene we see Cal Hotley. He's dressed in a tuxedo, he's dashing, he's wealthy, he's powerful, and he's giving Rose the hope diamond in one scene, you know, and then 5 minutes later he's slapping her across the face and telling her that she has to learn her place as his wife. You know, two very different expressions of the exact same character. And so you could see Rose's problem. You don't just walk up, draw your sword, and say, I'm coming for you, Cal, because the society sees him as a good guy. So the heroine's got a problem when dealing with minotaurs, and they're very difficult to beat. And again, I think they're fundamentally different from the Distant Dragon villain. So, you know, just right there, you've got two separate sources of conflict for the heroine: her native culture and what they expect of her, and then you've got this possessive, dominating character, often in stories, the masked minotaur, who is trying to possess the heroine and is usually almost pathologically unable to let her go. So,
see, what I find interesting about the Cal example is there is a deleted scene in which there was written that Jack would fight Cal. They actually end up fighting in the ship after he starts shooting at them. It's like in the dining area that's being flooded. Yeah, and Jack jumps Cal. They get into a fist fight, just beating the heck out of each other. Jack eventually kind of gets like winged in the shoulder and like runs away or something like that. And it's on the Blu-rays and stuff. Cameron cut it because he's like, this doesn't work. Jack is not this person. We don't need this. We need them to flee. We need Rose and Jack to leave together. And so that's why, like, if you look at later when Cal briefly reemerges, he's a little, no wait, maybe it's not Cal, maybe it's his butler guy. Yeah, Lovejoy. Maybe it's Lovejoy that fights. But he cut it because he's like, this doesn't work. This is no longer Rose's story. By inserting this like knight in shining armor moment of fighting and fisticuffs against this, it's gotta go.
Wow. Well, that's a brilliant observation, and I did not know about the deleted scene, but it confirms something that I have a similar observation, where there's an instinct toward the hero's journey, right? We're like, a climax should have this showdown. So the initial impulse, obviously, was to have the single combat between Jack and Cal, but Cameron, in my opinion, made the right call, because that is unnecessary in the Heroine's Labyrinth. We do not need Jack to defeat Cal. We need Rose to leave Cal in another archetypal moment that I call the broken truce, which Rose absolutely does. She has that pretty startling line where she's like, I'd rather be his whore than your wife, and then she spits on him. That's a broken truce, man. That, you know, there's no coming back from that. So, and of course, when she attempts to leave, what does Cal do? Does he say, there's other women out there? No, he goes into a murderous rage. He pulls out his bodyguard's pistol and he pursues her and tries to kill her. What happened to the guy offering the heart of the ocean? You know which Cal is the real Cal? And true to form in the masked minotaur fashion, the savage animal self of the minotaur is the dominant version. That's the real Cal, the one who pulls out the gun and shoots at her. So, you know, at that point, that's what a broken truce is. You know, it's where the heroine decisively moves away and toward what she wants. And there is usually the native culture pursues her in some way after that.
Before we go further into this is a fascinating conversation. I did want to take a little detour because before we started recording, I had Alex, Bekkie, and myself on your website, which is a fantastic website. I really dig it. You get a good feel for who you are, and you have this really cool personality test, like the which heroine are you test. And I took it twice and I got the same response. I wasn't sure if I could remember the answers I gave. So like I just again answered what I thought was honest. And I got the Vigilant Protector, which you have listed as like Brienne of Tarth, Mrs. Incredible, Elastigirl. I'm forgetting Michelle Yeoh's character in Crouching Tiger, and then Catelyn Stark. And the main characteristics are courage, compassion, tenacity. And Bekkie says that's me to a T. I don't know. I don't look too deep into myself. I just do what I do, which maybe that's what that is. I don't know. But I am very curious, like what Alex and Bekkie got. Bekkie, what did you get for your results? Did we lose her again? Are you on mute again, Rebecca?
Yeah, there was a lot of research that went into that personality test. I designed it. It took a massive amount of effort to put that together because you had to find all the different personalities, and there's a website you can go to where they categorize personality traits for fictional characters, and so you have to get all that, and then you have to kind of separate them all out, and then you have to figure out what is distinctive in that group of heroines or heroes. And then write up a profile, and then you have to design the questions, and that took freaking forever. But anyway, I'm proud of it. So if you get your
as
result,
you should be, like, yeah, I think it's a really great quiz, and the breakdown that you have afterward is just awesome.
Cool, that's great. I love hearing that. Yeah, the Vigilant Protector is a very heroic personality profile.
I mean, I'll take it. My favorite superhero is Captain America, so I'll take it.
Yeah, I ended up getting the Wise Maestro, the Guidance, Patience, Neutrality, the Oracle, and the Ancient One, which I think really works well. Which is, it's based off the Myers-Briggs. You have it as INFJ, which is, no matter how much growth I try in my life, that's what I always end up as.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
That's well. It doesn't mean you have to change your personality to grow. You just become wiser as you go.
Yeah.
Bekkie texted me since she's having issues. She got the Driven Quest Seeker, which that definitely sounds like her in my opinion.
Oh, okay.
I'm trying to see if I can't pull up a little bit more from the site here.
Yeah, I set it up to where you could just peruse the personalities. Yeah, see the 16. She got the which one?
Driven Quest Seeker. One thing I do need to point out as well for anyone listening who's like, oh, it's a bunch of girls on the website. Like, he does break down that there are the male characters as well. So, like, top of my list is T'Challa, Steve Rogers, Clark Kent, which, like, I'm wearing my Superman shirt today. So,
yes.
Happy to see all that. Groot, which, okay, yeah, definitely. She got INFP.
The Spiritual Heroine.
Right. Okay, so that is Beatrix Kiddo from Kill Bill. Belle from Beauty and the Beast, Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch, Alita Battle Angel, Jane Eyre, Pam Beesly from The Office, Luna Lovegood.
She's definitely she's not quite a Pam, I don't think, but I could definitely see a lot more of, I could see a good blend between Luna, Belle, and who was the second one you had mentioned on the list?
The Scarlet Witch.
Scarlet Witch, yeah, I could see a perfect blend of all three of those with her.
Well, and Lady Arwen from Lord of the Rings.
Oh, yes.
And by the way, for male heroes, that's Luke Skywalker's personality and Frodo. So two big ones on the guy side, too.
Well, hopefully she can get back in the chat with us real quick, and we can let her know she's Luke Skywalker.
That's awesome.
While we're waiting, one of the questions that, and I'm trying my best to make sure this doesn't sound like insensitive or like, who are you to be saying these sort of things? But like, what drove you towards telling like female women-led stories, and the perspective you bring to it? How do you think that adds to bringing a voice to the women experience being a man? Like, I'm not trying to say like, how dare you as a man tell women how to tell their stories, but like, I think men can have an interesting perspective on women-led stories, and I think it gives a good insight as to who that person is telling that story at their core.
Right. Well, it's a good question, and it comes up often, So I am sensitive to it, and I didn't set out to go this route. I was actually a big fan of the Byzantine Empire. And I always intended to tell a Byzantine story from the perspective of, or the focus on Justinian the Great, and who was married to Empress Theodora. And I really went for it, and I got lost in the woods. I did not know how to structure the story, and while retooling over a decade, it took of research and studying and learning and practicing writing. I ended up dropping Justinian and just focusing on Theodora. I just decided she was. As interesting as he is, I found her to be more interesting. And I think I am drawn on some level to the struggle with the native culture. I think I was drawn to that. There's certain nuances there that are very specific. And as I began to write her story, it got to be a bigger and bigger story. And I needed help from a lot of from women to help me with my character. And so I began to get a lot of insight, a lot of perspective, shared life experiences from other women who were specifically trying to help me write Empress Theodora the best I could. And so this entire process of like working with other women and listening and getting some insights there kind of made me appreciate my character, Empress Theodora, a lot more, and also what my wife and my mom and my female friends were telling me. You know, it was kind of like just re-looking at the world through a different lens, and it really helped me out. And I took it to heart, and I spent years fine-tuning Faraway Bird, the historical novel book, to get it right. And I think I must have done something well, or I must have gotten something right, because the book did end up winning several awards. So I was very proud of it. It was better than I ever hoped it could have been when I first set out to write it. So at that point, I felt that, at that point, it also led me to research the heroine's Labyrinth. So, and I didn't even intend to write it into a book. I was just excited that I came up with an approach. And the more I shared it with professional writers, they were like, you need to write this down, because this is nowhere, this doesn't exist anywhere else. And I tried to write book 2 for Theodora, but this heroine's Labyrinth was like over my head. And I was like, I gotta write this down. Knowing that I haven't written it down began to like just bug me. So then I started to write it down, and this was not easy either. You know, you also have to I didn't write this in isolation. You know, again, I got a lot of help from female mentors and friends, personal and professional, and took 4 years to craft out what is essentially a relatively small writing craft book, because I wanted to try to get it right. And even then, there are some people that have read it and like, you know, how dare he wade into these waters? And to be honest, sometimes it hurts, because it's like, you know, it's almost like, you know, it's like they're saying I can't have thoughts on this. And but at the same time, I have to always remember my goal. And my goal was to help other writers. This isn't telling people how to write female characters. This is saying this is an approach to help you structure a story that's based on heroine-led stories. And there's a lot there, and it's a beautiful and an amazing character arc with these archetypal patterns and events in them. And it changed me. And so I guess my hope is someone reads it and is like, yeah, this is pretty awesome. I never heard this before, and I can use this when I write. You know, that's really the goal.
Awesome. I did get an update from Rebecca. She's unfortunately not going to be able to make it back in. It looks like her internet's just not cooperating, which is part of the problem we were experiencing with her. But she did send me her list of questions, so I'll follow that up with. She does want to know like your favorite and least favorite character traits or tropes to write.
Ooh.
Well, I'll tell you, one of my favorites is vulnerability. It's very important to me. It became more important as I went. I didn't really think about this until I tried to figure out what it was that was making one heroine work and another one not work. And this works with heroes too. Vulnerability. You know, the heroine in scenes should be vulnerable, and that does not mean she's weak. And that's important because, especially early on in the story, when there's a level of inexperience for the heroine, it's important to see a little bit of a swing and a miss, you know, because then when she hits the ball out of the park at the end of the story, we see that there's growth. You know, this was a problem that was difficult for her to overcome early on, and now she's overcome it, and she's overcome it decisively. And it's inspiring to see her overcome it. That's really what we're wanting when we read the story. We want to see that payoff. Someone got the best of her early on, and we didn't like that when we read that, you know. And now we see her overcome that later in the story, and it's like, yes. And by reading the story, we have like vicariously experienced growth ourselves. You know, the heroine has modeled growth, even for me, even though I'm a guy. It doesn't matter. I have experienced growth through her actions. So vulnerability is one of my most important traits. It's the most relatable. You know, how many times have we been, we've lost some sort of social face-off, and it doesn't feel too good. When it happens to a heroine or a hero, it's like, I didn't like that. And now I'm rooting for her or him even more because I've been there and I hate that moment. I want to see what she does to overcome it. And then the least favorite is probably the opposite of that, which is unearned power, unearned strength. It's very frustrating to watch that. I recently just watched Raiders of the Lost Ark with one of my good friends. Her name is Retro Nerd Girl. She's a YouTuber, and we did a watch party. And I had heard at some point that Indiana Jones is an example of a male character who's OP. But when you watch that, I'm like, he doesn't do well. He doesn't even look athletic when he's making these moves, and he loses the idol in the beginning. That German mechanic beats him up. So even Indy has to be vulnerable for us to really like the guy. So when he's dangling off the back of a truck on a rope, we're like, whoa, that guy just did that. It's amazing. So I would say unearned power or unearned strength is the least desirable, the least interesting. And vulnerability is, to me, the most interesting and the most compelling trait a character can have, male or female.
To kind of piggyback off of that question, one of the things that I've seen a lot of recently with at least YA young adult novels that have been translated into films, I'm particularly talking about Twilight, is the blank slate, and maybe a little bit of 50 Shades, where it's the blank slate protagonist, for lack of a better term, where you have Bella, and I don't even know what the 50 Shades of Grey character is. Legitimately, those are knowledge gaps for me that I'm not too fussed about. But from most of the critiques I've seen of those movies is that they're specifically those two women leads are not actual characters. They're placeholders for people to project onto. So there's not really any true character stuff going on. It's like Link in the Legend of Zelda games, where there's not really a personality. The personality is what you project into how you're playing the game. Whereas with 50 Shades and Twilight, particularly in what I'm talking about, how you're perceiving the movie, you're projecting your reactions into what's going on there. So how do you view those sort of things? And like, does that impact how you approach writing in the future, or on a specific project where you're like, is it going too far into the blank slate territory? Or that can also be a good thing too. I definitely understand the benefits of that depending on the narrative tool.
Well, I think it depends on what the author is trying to achieve. Maybe in 50 Shades, it's a good thing if a reader vicariously just participates in these, extravagant escapades. So maybe that was a good thing for that. I honestly have not read that book though, so I'm doing a little speculating. I watched the movies for Twilight. I did not read the books, but I watched them. In fact, I watched the first one a lot because at the time, my future wife, she had a couple of her cousins over, and they were younger girls, and they were really into it. So we ended up watching Twilight a lot. And the first movie is actually not that bad. I'll admit I didn't mind the first one. But in terms of the blank slate, there is something that I've uncovered, and I do discuss it in the book. I call it the sacred fire, which is a multifaceted archetypal pattern. But one of the most important parts of it is the idea of, it's easy to recognize a hero in sacred fire, right? It's the moment where she claims her sacred fire. She signals to the world her aspirations, that she has some sort of a dream, some sort of a place she wants to go. It can be very dramatic, like Belle, or Moana declaring she wants to go out past the breakers. She wants to explore the ocean, in a native culture that doesn't do that sort of thing. So you immediately have that struggle. So that's a dramatic one. It could be small, like Coraline, who just wants her parents' love and attention. That's really what she wants. That's what she's looking for in that story. So, and this is important, and this is what Ray lacks in the sequel trilogies. A hero in Sacred Fire comes from something. Like you've heard the phrase "pass the torch." So, you get it most directly through your family lineage, right? You come from something. Moana, it's very good. They did a good job with her. She comes from her parents. There are cultural expectations there, and there's a native culture there. So think of it like a giant bonfire, and that bonfire is the native culture, and you take one of those logs out, one of those sticks, and there's a flame on the end, and you hand that to your heroine. So in that sense, she has her own sacred fire in her hand, but it came from the brighter communal fire of her native culture. So in like Rey Palpatine or Rey Skywalker from the sequel trilogy, she seems to come from nothing. And that was a problem for her character, that there was a nothing past, a nothing that was handed to her. Nothing was really passed down to her. They said she was Palpatine's daughter, but the movies never gave us any sense of what that meant and where she came from and how that influenced her identity in the passing of the story. Now compare that to Luke Skywalker. His past comes right off the bat. His father. His father was a pilot. He wants to be like his dad. So there's something of his past, something of that sacred fire that is passed down to Luke and comes from something, and it defines his identity. Daenerys Targaryen, right? She's pretty tough in Game of Thrones. She's very individualistic, very moralistic, and very aggressive at pursuing her aims. But she's a Targaryen. So where she came from matters. She has a Targaryen outlook on the world. She wants the Iron Throne, yeah, for personal reasons, but also because it's her birthright. So I think one way to get around that blank slate is remember from where your heroine comes from. Where did her sacred fire come from? What was passed down to her that matters to her? Now, some of that might confine her and create conflict between her and that native culture. The end of the story, very successful story, is the heroine reconciles both her individual aspirations and the expectations of the native culture. Think of Moana, right? She wants to be a seafaring and the culture's like, no. Moana has a very elegant solution to this. So the story ends with her not just becoming a seafaring woman, heroine, but she has restored this value to her own culture. They were a seafaring culture, and they tried to forget this, and she brought it back out of them. That's a reconciliation of her individual aspirations and the native culture's aspirations. So from where you come from is a vital aspect to bring to your characters if you want to avoid that blank slate.
The way you just full circled Moana just made me all the more mad that Zootopia beat out Moana for best animated feature that year.
Did it?
It did.
Yep.
Moana is one of the best movies, Mike. I have two boys. They love it. It's just a great movie. And if you watch the Nielsen ratings for like years, Moana's always in the top 10. People are always watching Moana, and there's a reason for that. So yes, I'm with you. Now that I heard that, I am now also mad.
So since we just went into something that like made me mad, let's talk about, because I love talking writing. In another life, I was trying to become a journalist. I wasn't very good at like creative writing, but like sports journalism, which is why I have the podcast, critical writing towards movies and everything. Like it was something that just having my fingers on a keyboard just brought me a whole bunch of joy. So Rebecca's asking as well, what is the biggest joys of writing for you?
I think it's funny you asked that, because I've wondered myself sometimes. I think I have a strange urge to communicate, and writing gives me a chance to sit down and focus all my thoughts and attention on communicating one idea in that paragraph, in that sentence. And there's times where I'm driving in my car and I'm just rehearsing how I would say something in the next chapter. Like, I know what's going to happen in the scene, and I know that the issue is her sense of inferiority in front of this other, aristocratic woman. So it's like, well, okay, how do you explain that? And I will sit there and just rehearse sentence by sentence what it is that means, like how to communicate that. And so I think for me, writing satisfies that urge to communicate. And writing is beautiful because it gives you a chance to communicate it exactly in words. And whether you've done it or not after you've read it, and sometimes there were lines in both books. It took years to craft just the right sentence. I kept reading it. I'm like, that's not what I'm trying to say. And I would have to keep rewriting it. And then at some point you just give up. You abandon it. You're like, I tried my best to explain it. And then even now I'm like, oh, I could have said this. I could have said it this way. So I think an urge to communicate, and then on top of that, an urge to communicate specific things about the human experience, to get it right in words. I think that's what makes me love writing so much.
I can definitely understand the concept of the one word, because part of my job right now is I have to review scripts and stuff for phone calls that we make. And one of the scripts we have, they emphasize every word because they assume people are just going to contract everything. So like it says like, I will, I'll, but like the way I read everything is I read it as it's written because that's what they told us that needs to be said. And so I see I will. And one of the things we have is like, I will call you back. And I read it because to me, whenever I see will after the will is very important. So I say, I will call you back. And it almost sounds like a threat.
I'm coming for you.
I'm like, we need to contract this because otherwise I'm going to just keep sounding like I'm going to like threaten them. Like, I will find you.
But if you say it with an Austrian accent, it always is threatening. I'll call you back.
Or Scottish, the I will. W-U-L-L. I will.
Well, if you're watching Red October, that's Russian instead of Scottish.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Sean Connery and his willingness to change accents.
Okay, so the question is going to come off clunky, but
sure.
So I'm going to preface this there we go, with a lot. I was raised by women. My mother had me when she was very young, and so my household was my mother's sisters were a little bit older, and also her younger sisters. My youngest aunt is only like 3 years older than me, and so that was my household. Was my grandmother, who everyone called mom, so I call her mom. My mother was mommy. And then my mother, when she had a few other children, my siblings, my sisters. So that's the household I grew up with. And so when I write, I've never found male characters particularly interesting unless they are that like Arnold, Conan, Aragorn kind of like bravado. Aragorn is not bravado, but he's a masculine guy, and his journey is to reclaim the kingdom. I always tend to lean towards writing female characters, and what I found really funny is one of the books I'm working on right now, which I hope to self-publish soon-ish, is about a woman in who has won a tournament in this society to possibly become the heir of the kingdom through these shenanigans that happen. And part of it is she must pass the training, which involves her learning to become a princess or a queen. And she is in the castle, which is a ramshackle castle that's been built up over centuries. So there's many labyrinthine rooms and walls and doors, and no one hallway looks like another. And she's confined to certain parts of it. And as she's passing these tests and learning to become royalty, she's allowed access to other areas of the castle. And I'm reading your damn book, and I'm like, damn it. Okay, so we have a labyrinth, we have guardians, we have secret chambers. Well, crap, Douglas. I'm gonna scrap everything and start over. You know what?
Say, that sounds like you're doing things right. It sounds like
no. I'm gonna scrap everything. She's gonna be very strong. She's gonna use a sword. She's gonna stab everyone until she's queen.
And she's gonna go, yeah.
That happens too in some stories.
Yeah. So I guess
I actually think it suggests that you might be tapped in, archetypally speaking, to a pattern that will resonate.
Yeah.
The creative challenge is how to make your labyrinth unique.
Right.
How to make your chamber guardian memorable that no one's ever seen. How to make that chamber distinctive. Fill it with archetypal images that no one's seen before. So that's the beauty of an archetype. It may be the same thing under the hood, but what's on the outside is totally different. War of the Worlds doesn't look anything like the Battle of Hoth, and yet underneath that's the same exact archetypal terror approaching that is unstoppable, shooting at you, looking around for you. It's the same thing, but you don't know because the creators came up with something that was so different in the expression of the archetype. We don't care. We're entertained by both versions, so it sounds like you're doing fine, actually.
So that was a very roundabout way to compliment you and be mad at you. But do you think that because, to me, I've always just found women more, I personify with them more because of the environment I grew up in. I just find them to be more interesting because the challenges that presented to them are more cultural, socially dynamic than just a brute that can do things. Like I love Schwarzenegger, I love Stallone, the Marvel movies. The guys brute force their way through every challenge in life. Hell, the end of Civil War is 3 dudes beating the hell out of each other because they're sad about their mom. I mean, it's true. I cried. There is sorrow. Bucky lost an arm, but
Yeah.
do you think that the reason for the Labyrinth, or the reason for these more compelling socially structured stories, is because women are more dynamically interesting because the default is not just I muscle things?
Well, yes. Well, so I have thought about this. I didn't put this exactly in the book because that's a great question, by the way. I think it's because of the way our minds work. When you pick up a book, a lot of heroine-centric stories do this. They confront you with the rules of the culture. This is what we do. This is what we don't do. Don't ever do this. Never open that door. Our brains start to immediately categorize the do's and the don'ts. And this is compelling. For whatever reason, it's compelling. It's like being recoded. Like when I read Memoirs of a Geisha, that's early 20th century, turn of the century Japan. It's a female character in I'm not a woman and I'm not from Japan. Doesn't matter. When I pick open that book and I start reading and it's like, this is the world. We do this. You can never do this. And there's hard rules on this. My mind begins to process those rules and you become immersed in this culture. And that is in and of itself compelling. Because now you have to operate, or your character has to now operate under these confining situations. And watching someone navigate that in and of itself is compelling. So I think, like you said, you're drawn to that. I am too. And to be honest, I did not grow up in a very like female environment. It was a lot of macho uncles and my dad, big linebacker dad and everything. So, but I too am. Well, I guess I'm a small guy, so I wasn't really like beating everybody up. So maybe I felt some of that, a sense of being overlooked or dismissed, or I had to deal with things in a different way too. And I've always been intrigued by characters that are in a world where dangers are all around you. It's like all around you, and dangers pass close to you. And for some reason, I just find that very compelling. And it sounds like you do too. So I think that, anyway, that's my answer. I think there is something psychological about it that we're drawn to.
Yeah.
You tie your mind into a knot. Now you have to untie this knot. And a good story a good labyrinth story will do that to you.
Yeah, because you mentioned the whole Gordian knot mythology with Alexander the Great, of like, how do you undo the knot? Well, I cut it. The only thing I could, when you're mentioning like, the only true soldier story, I was like, the only true soldier story in history is probably Alexander the Great. Because he left and he came back in a body bag, but
yeah, he did not return well.
No, because guys, male-centric stories tend to be just, there is no knot I can't shoot with a bullet.
Well, yeah, there's a creativity to it. I don't want to dismiss it because there's a creativity to physicality.
Yeah.
Like when I was watching Indiana Jones, I was like, there's a certain creativeness to this action and this physical character, and watching a character react like that and with daring in dangerous situations, that's appealing too. It's just it's just different.
It is different. Yeah.
It's different, and I can sit down and watch Raiders, and I'm sure you guys can too.
Yeah.
It could be just as fun to watch Raiders of the Lost Ark as it is to read, Memoirs of a Geisha. But it's a different thing. It's a different conflict, and I guess my goal when writing The Heroine's Labyrinth was to separate that out and appreciate, really show a lot of appreciation for the differences in those archetypal patterns and the overarching growth arc there.
Yeah, it's almost like compartmentalizing, because as men, when we watch Superman, Captain America, all these Iron Man, billionaires, doing all these crazy things and super muscular men getting to do everything. That leans more into like the wish fulfillment side of things. Like, oh man, I wish I could fly. I wish I could, save a cat from a tree. I wish I could just do good. And then with a more woman-led story, it's focusing more on like empathy, and it's attacking a different part of the brain, for lack of a better word, but it's engaging should be the proper word. It's engaging a different part of the brain, because I was mostly raised with my mom and my two sisters. My dad was around. He and I had a really good relationship. But even he wasn't like the most macho man in the world. He didn't raise me to be like, this is a carburetor. This is how you change oil. Like I know how to change a tire, but I couldn't tell you how to change an oil. Like I couldn't tell you an air filter from an oil filter. And that's not a bad thing, I don't think. I'm going on a little tangent here because my ADHD is kicking in.
That's all right. I got it too.
My wife and I were grocery shopping with our kids. I'm a girl dad. I have 3 little girls, all under the age of 10. And this elder gentleman, probably early 70s at his youngest, just looked at me with my 4 girls around me and was like, oh man, I hope the dog is at least a boy. And I'm like,
really?
I like looked around and was like, who the hell are you talking to? And then I realized he was talking to me, and I was like, well, sorry, what was that again? He's like, I hope the dog's a boy. And I'm just like, why are you assuming we have a dog, among other things? And like, why does this matter?
Yeah,
like I do, but the dog is also a girl. The only other boys in my house are cats.
I have a bunch of buddies who are girl dads. They're the happiest people on earth, man.
Until the wedding bill comes in.
Well, there's always pros and cons.
That's when we say screw tradition. We're splitting this thing 50-50, right?
There you go. That's your broken truth with them.
Through the conversation you and Alex were kind of having there, I was thinking more about like, with male-centric stories, it is more wish fulfillment for guys. And there are like caveats too, because like women have wish fulfillment stuff that they can do with women-led stories. But I do find it when stories are more empathetic, I attach a little bit more to them. They become a little more memorable. Like I love Atonement, very woman-led story. Your Name, fantastic anime. If you have not seen it, I would strongly recommend it.
It's called Your Name?
Your Name. It is absolutely fantastic. It will break you in the best way possible.
Really?
Yeah,
wow.
Our buddy Antonio over at the Cultworthy, he's not a huge anime person. He's not a big animation person. If you want to go back and listen to our episode on Your Name on his podcast, it's the Cultworthy podcast, Animation April 2023. We kick off with that one because he's like, I need to talk about this.
Okay, so it's called, what's the name of the podcast?
It's the podcast is the Cultworthy. So like trustworthy, but cult, like cult classics. And then
okay,
that would, yep.
Yeah, I've been getting into anime more and more. It's and also some of the animated things. Like I don't know if you guys have seen Arcane, League of Legends, unbelievable. Blue Eye Samurai, unbelievable. And then there's another one I want to see, The Boy and the Heron, which I've told is really good.
Yes. The Arcane came very highly recommended from, I'm going to call her a friend of the show. She might not, but Melissa Flores, who currently just wrapped up The Dead Lucky, and she's finishing out the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers comic from Boom Studios.
Oh, cool.
She's strongly recommended Arcane. So like that's been on my list for a while. It's just Arcane been a matter of getting to it.
It's a 10 out of 10. It was some of the best animated storytelling I've seen in decades. Like it was incredible. Yeah. And it's hero-centric, so of course I got to feast upon this great story and also study it, and I've included it in a few examples in the book. But anyway, but yeah, I'll check that out. Your Name, that was a pretty strong
from Makoto Shinkai. That I think it was his feature film debut as an animated director, and yeah, it is. It's one that's spoiler alert for an episode I have coming up on Dan's podcast, Casting Views. There's a Mind Wipe episode that I'll be on, and one of the movies I talk about that if I could see it with fresh eyes ever again, it would be Your Name. Like it was just so good.
Oh, that's a huge thing to say. that urge is very rare to be like, man, I wish I can go back to the beginning and rewatch it for the first time. That's saying a lot.
Yeah, if you watch that trailer, the trailer is probably only the first 20 minutes of the movie, and you're like, oh yeah, it's a charming little body swap movie. It becomes so much more, and it is very female. It's very female centric as well. I think it does lean more into the boy side of things, but it's like what we're talking about, where it's diving more into an empathic storyline instead of it being like, I'm going to brute force this thing. It's more, I need to find out the connections I have to bring me to the resolution to this story. And that's where I think a lot of the more successful women-led stories bring us.
Yeah, well, totally. That's what I'm saying. Like being able to separate this out and look at it as something different really made me appreciate heroic women in fiction. I already appreciated them, but now, I don't know if you read the part with the Shield Maiden. I'll get emotional now when I see Shield Maiden moments because it's so heroic. It's perhaps the most heroic thing that can happen in stories. Whether they're prepared or not, in a moment's notice to leap in and physically interpose themselves between a defenseless second person, which is missing in the hero's journey one-on-one combat. They lack the second individual right, typically just a few feet away. And they'll block that masked minotaur from that person. And it happens all the time. Frozen has that great visual where Hans is coming down and she makes herself into this unbreakable block of ice. Of course, Ripley, the greatest Shield Maiden moment of all time in that loader.
Get away from her, you bitch. Yeah.
Yeah, man. You do not, these heroines rise to this occasion, and it is so heroic and it's hard to forget. And so now when I see it in films, there are times where I get this emotional zing because I've unpacked it so much. So there's so much meaning in that moment. They're the enforcer of a red line. They're the only enforcer of the red line, and they're going to enforce it, even if they're completely outmatched. And it's quite a spectacle to witness. So I know what you're saying. It's when you experience these stories on that level, it can really hit you.
Yeah, and to your point, it's also not something that is like, this is definitive. Men are the tanks and women are the empathy. Obviously you can have mixing up of everything, but it just seems like that seems to be the more poignant storytelling method. Is you get the wish fulfillment from the dudes, and the women make you feel things. And I think that it's fairly accurate, but again, there's room to move, and you can always talk other things like Forrest Gump. If we want to talk about male empathy, Forrest just kind of muscles his way through life. He follows the wheel of time, and it just pushes him through the world. Right. But then you get to the end with the scene with him and Jenny. That breaks my heart every time. You can go through so many different things. The Green Mile, Shawshank Redemption. There are plenty of empathic male-centric stories that fill that void. And I'm just trying to, it's my long-winded way of saying I'm not saying it's definitively one way or the other, even though the internet would take it that way. Right.
Yeah. I have, there's a few early reviews that came in that mischaracterize my book and what my message, some of the messages similar to what you're talking about. Sometimes people are like, oh, he says that women can't take the hero's journey. This guy's an idiot. And it's like, I never said that, and I don't believe that, So, but you're going to get that. You can't avoid that. It's just the way the world works, and some people are going to do it.
It's based around the story structure you want to tell.
Yeah.
Right. What I'm saying is that I studied stories with heroines, and there are patterns in it that I had not heard before, and knowing those patterns helped me as a writer. And so I spent the last 4 years writing them down with the best of my abilities in order to share them with other writers. Purely because this book didn't exist anywhere else. And I like people, I like writers, and I had this urge to share this. And it's fun to talk about, it's fun to talk about. And it's, to be perfectly honest, it's great to have another topic that isn't the hero's journey, that I can contrast it with something and have something else at the ready to approach a topic or a question or a story related issue that someone is wants to discuss.
Yeah, and I mean, you ever since we've been having this conversation, since I looked over your website, saw the email, I've been thinking about all these things that you've been talking about, and like I just noticed your sweater you're wearing says Starfleet, and which we have to talk Star Trek every episode now because it's in our promo.
Oh, that's awesome.
I'm a big fan of Lower Decks. I'm legitimately not a Trekkie. My first true exposure to it was the 2009 reboots. Like almost every kid in my area watched Star Trek 4 for Earth Day, like every year in school growing up. But overall, like I never really watched Star Trek. It wasn't something that clicked for me, and I didn't really know what it was. But I started watching Lower Decks because I heard it's like, oh, it's Futurama, but set in Star Trek. It's like, I like Futurama. I like animation. Let's see what's going on. And to your point with the Heroine's Labyrinth, like Mariner, her whole thing is the fact that her parents, her culture is rooted in Starfleet. And she kind of wants to break away from it and make her own path without utilizing the ends that she has with her parents. And it creates conflict for her because her parents are constantly trying to be like, hey, you can rise up through the ranks. Just do what I'm telling you. And she's like, no, I'm going to do it my way. But then she has her tantrum, which makes her the like sitcom star of the show. Is she's just like, she's smart, but she's rebellious, and like those two things are just constantly in conflict, and it always comes back to her culture that helps her resolve the issue of that episode. And I think, again, coming back to the Heroine's Labyrinth and what you've brought to the table here, it makes a whole bunch of sense.
That is great. I love hearing that because I feel like that is the mission that I set out for, that someone could read this and be like, this is useful. This is helpful for me to understand maybe a character like you just said, or to use it in your own writing. That's really what I want. And it's fun. It's fun when you can spot a pattern like that. It makes it more compelling to me, what you just described. Like, oh yeah, there's the conflict with the native culture. Now I understand it on this other level. So, it's exciting when those connections are made. And now I can't help it. I'll be watching a show, and even my kids are like, "Oh, that Shield Maiden moment." I'm like, "That's right, son." So yeah, it is. It makes it fun. It puts another layer there.
So the last question I have from Rebecca, while we're on the subject of like different forms of media, her last question is, how important for you as a writer is consuming and reading additional media? Like, obviously, I know for me and Alex, it took us a long while with the podcast to get over imposter syndrome. For you, where does the creativity start as well as the inspiration begin, while also reconciling with like, yes, this inspired me, but it's different?
Right. Well, the first part of that question was how much do you place like a value on reading additional media?
Yes,
absolute. Because you have to read. Yeah, I like to read other books. I like to watch movies. I like to watch the TV shows. That becomes the library in my imagination. You just internalize what you're watching, what you're reading, and there are times when you're writing when you're like, oh, kind of like that scene in House of the Dragon, or kind of like The Wizard of Oz. It becomes unavoidable as a creative that you're drawing upon all these other things that you've reacted to, right? This thrilled me. Even like we were talking about Raiders of the Lost Ark, that great stunt he does where he goes under the truck and around. That came out of the 1930s. There was a stuntman who did it in Zorro Rides Again and the John Wayne movie Stagecoach. So George Lucas, Steven Spielberg watched those old black and white movies, and then when they're on the set and they're like, what should we do for this chase? They drew upon someone else's story, and they added that into Raiders of the Lost Ark, and now it's its own thing. And we all remember that from Raiders. So you have to read other media. You have to read other books. I think the more you read, the more you watch and experience other stories, I think it absolutely strengthens you as a writer and as a creative. Why are we drawn to these stories? Why do we want to write something? Why do we want to create something else? So I think the two kind of work as a tandem. Did I answer that?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. I lost it. Alex, did you have another question? I'm going to see if I can't dig it back up.
A comment about the empathic male lead.
Oh,
I believe that there is a defining moment from a franchise that started a few years back that shows that if we give the male lead one empathic moment, we can build 4 movies built on gung fu. Because the second John Wick's dog dies and we see his sorrow, we have allowed him 10 hours of murder because of that dog. If he didn't shed a tear over his wife's last gift being taken from him, we would not have 4 movies of awesome.
It's also the mysterious world building.
Oh yeah, the world building, the Bowery King, the Continental, the Concierge, all the little tidbits, how the coins work, and even in the last movie. Oh, this for a puppy. It wasn't just a puppy. When I first watched it with my wife, she had me skip that part, but she's like, and then when we skipped it, she said, "Does he kill them all?" I'm like, "Yes," and she went, "Good," and we just kept going. Because that's all she needed was, you touch the dog, it's over.
game over, man. Yeah, totally. You don't kill puppies, man.
Exactly.
Yeah, he's justified whatever he does from there on out, as long as it's to human beings.
Exactly. Right? Yeah, as long as it's to human beings, in as many manners as possible.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and John Wick, it's interesting because it actually follows a lot of the Heroine's Labyrinth pattern. And
massively.
You notice how so you start with an empathic moment like that, but think about the Labyrinth has to be the rules, right? The Continental, it emerges in the story almost by magic to be like, this is what you can and can't do. Here's the hotel, here's the Labyrinth, and so it's funny how the rules manifest differently. The sacred order of assassins becomes the cultural rules that he has to follow or break.
Yeah, and when the Bowery King helps him, he is given 7 slices from a sword because of 7 bullets. Everything in that world makes sense, that it just builds upon each other and the confines within. And when John Wick does stuff in the second one that causes the third and fourth to continue on,
right,
you immediately know shit just got real.
Oh,
you have broken cardinal rules. Was it the sacred trust is broken, and everything must go on. It is.
Yeah, the broken truce. Yeah,
broken truce.
He breaks the rules of the culture and goes his own way. That's the broken truce.
Yeah.
So, and the native culture comes roaring after him in classic heroine fashion. When you break the truce, the culture responds. They come after you. And by the way, John Wick, it's one of the more recent franchises, and it is good, man. I have to admit, I do like me some John Wick.
Did you figure it out, Josh?
No, I've been racking my brain, but it's also getting a little late for me. So I think that might as well my ADHD turns into my geriatric moment. So I think that's a good place to end it. But award-winning author of Faraway Bird, Douglas A. Burton, also author of The Heroine's Journey. Both books are available. You can find them at local bookstores, on Amazon, whichever you prefer, digitally, like Alex purchased. Douglas, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me on to have this discussion with you guys. It was a blast.
Yeah, open invitation. You are welcome back anytime.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, that'd be great. It was just fun talking to you guys. Yeah.
And that's what we strive for. Interviews are great. You get to give out some information, but you also want to know the person.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to go for. We want to get into it and see what's going on.
Wait, Josh, we didn't allow him to pimp his social media.
Oh yes, please let us know where we can find you on social media. I found you on Instagram, but I don't know if anyone else has yet.
Oh yeah, I don't do much. I need to get Instagram going, but I'm mostly. You can find me at my website, douglasaburton.com. I do have a Facebook following, Douglas A. Burton, author. And I do appear on YouTube quite often on the Table Talk channel. And also lately with Retro Nerd Girl, we'll do watch parties of movies and we'll discuss the films. And sometimes we do look at it through the lens of the Heroine's Labyrinth. So, that's where you could find me.
And we'll link Doug's website in our episode description as well. Alex, who's doing our remix this week?
Tyler Bates from the John Wick fame.
Thank you for using John Wick and not a Zack Snyder film. So everyone, please join our Discord. The link is in the episode description as well. Follow us on all the social media platforms: Blue Sky, Instagram, Threads, Hive Social, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and Lonnie's website. Email us your thoughts, question, reviews, anything you have to tell us, opinions. Email us at tsmackpod@gmail.com. Thank you to Leo Allen for our musical themes, Beppo and Retro Ale Studios for our avatars. Please like, subscribe, rate, review on your podcatcher of choice. Douglas, thank you again so much for being here and taking the time. I went a little longer than I was expecting, but I appreciate every second of it. It is a great conversation. And thank you, dear listeners, most importantly, for being here. Alex, I guess you're thanked for being here too. Everyone for listening, take care. Oh, and thanks, Rebecca. Sorry you had to miss this.
Watch Star Trek.